The pen didn't feel like a weapon when I bought it. It was a matte black, heavy thing, a gift to myself for crossing 8 figures in liquid assets before my 35th birthday. But looking at the loan origination document on my monitor, that pen's distinct, slightly flawed ink bleed was staring back at me. My brother, Julian, had always possessed a strange, fluid talent for mimicry. When we were kids, he could copy our father's signature to get out of detention. I always thought it was a party trick. I didn't think he'd use it to strip mine my life's work. The document was a commercial line of credit for $450,000, secured against my logistics firm's primary warehouse. The signature at the bottom was mine. Except I was in Tokyo the day it was executed, dealing with a customs crisis. Julian had been house-sitting. He knew where the spare keys to the home office were, he knew the name of my primary loan officer, and he knew exactly how much equity I had sitting idle. I didn't call him. When you find a venomous snake in your bed, you don't strike up a conversation. You call the handler. I called Marcus Vance. Marcus wasn't just a banker. He was the head of risk mitigation for the Regional Enterprise Division. We had played college football together, but more importantly, he was a man who viewed financial fraud with the same visceral disgust a surgeon reserves for a malignant tumor. "Tell me this is an administrative error," Marcus said, his voice flat over the speakerphone. "Look at the IP address the digital portion was authorized from," I replied, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows of my office. The city below looked small, cold, and entirely transactional. "It's my home network, but look at the secondary verification code. It went to a burner number registered to a shell LLC called J&K Ventures, Julian's initials, and his fiancée, Kelly." A long silence stretched over the line. I could hear the rhythmic clicking of Marcus's keyboard. "The money is already gone, Arthur," Marcus said. "It was cleared 48 hours ago, transferred into a Tier 3 offshore account in the Caymans, then split into smaller tranches. He didn't just borrow this. He structured it to disappear." "Can you freeze the collateral?" "No, the contract is executed. As far as the bank's automated systems are concerned, you owe us 450 grand, with interest compounding daily. If you don't pay, we seize the warehouse. The only way out of this, the only asterisk way, is if you file an official affidavit of forgery, which means the bank takes over the investigation. And then we turn it over to the state prosecutor's financial crimes unit. It becomes a criminal theft charge. Grand larceny, identity theft, bank fraud. Arthur, they won't just slap his wrist. They will dismantle him." I looked at a framed photograph on my desk. It was Julian and me, 10 years ago, standing in front of our first delivery truck. He had his arm around my shoulder, laughing, his hair messy. He looked like a boy who had just played a harmless prank. Now, he was a 32-year-old man who had looked at my hard work and decided he was entitled to $500,000 of it without asking. "File it," I said. "Are you sure?" Marcus asked, his tone softening slightly. "His wedding is this weekend. Your mother called me yesterday about a seating arrangement question. She's ecstatic." "Julian knew the date when he signed my name," I said. "File the charges." The next 48 hours were a master class in corporate coldness. The bank didn't move with the slow, bureaucratic crawl people usually expect. When $500,000 of institutional money is compromised through internal fraud channels, the response is swift and surgical. I stayed in my office, working 16-hour days, pretending everything was normal. My mother called 3 times, leaving frantic voicemails about the rehearsal dinner, the floral arrangements, and how Julian was stressed because some business deal was delayed. I didn't return her calls. If I spoke to her, she would hear the ice in my voice, and she would investigate. She would find out before the trap was sprung. Julian had chosen the most expensive venue in the state for his wedding gala, an old estate turned luxury resort nestled in the hills, 2 hours outside the city. The cost of the venue alone must have eaten up a significant portion of whatever legitimate money he had left, or maybe he paid for it with my stolen equity. Every time I thought about the logistics of his betrayal, a dull, throbbing ache started behind my eyes. On Friday evening, I received a text from Julian. "Hey bro, missed you at the rehearsal. Everything good. Need you sharp for tomorrow. Best man duties." I stared at the screen for 5 minutes. The sheer audacity of it was almost admirable. He had stolen enough money to ruin my business, yet he still wanted me to stand beside him, hold the ring, and tell a room full of 200 people what a wonderful, honest man he was. He wanted the money, and he wanted my blessing to enjoy it. I typed back a short response. Asterisk, just finishing up some paperwork at the office. See you tomorrow. Saturday arrived with a clear, biting sky. I dressed with meticulous care. A tailored black suit, a crisp white shirt, and the matte black pen tucked into my inside pocket. A reminder of what brought us here. When I arrived at the resort, the atmosphere was thick with engineered happiness. String quartets played near the entrance, and guests in evening wear wandered through the manicured gardens. I avoided the main pavilion and walked straight to the groom's suite. I didn't knock. I just turned the handle and walked in. Julian was standing in front of a full-length mirror, adjusting his bow tie. He looked successful. He looked like the man he always wanted to be. When he saw my reflection in the glass, his face lit up with a brilliant, easy smile that had gotten him out of trouble his entire life. "Arthur, you made it," he said, turning around and stepping forward to hug me. I stepped back, just enough to make the movement obvious. His arms hovered in the air for a fraction of a second before he dropped them, his smile faltering slightly, the corners of his mouth twitching. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice dropping an octave. "You look like someone died." "We need to talk about J and K Ventures," I said softly. The color didn't leave his face immediately. Instead, it was like a mask settled over his features. The easygoing, charming younger brother vanished, replaced by something defensive and sharp. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said, turning back to the mirror, though his hands stayed still against his sides. "Is this a joke? I'm getting married in an hour, Arthur, if you're going to bring up business." $450,000, Julian," I interrupted. My voice was level, completely devoid of anger. Anger is messy. This was business. The commercial line of credit against the Sector 4 warehouse. You used my signature. You used my home network to bypass the initial security layer. He froze for a beat, then let out a short, nervous laugh. "Arthur, you're losing it. I don't have access to your accounts. Why would I do that?" "Because you owe people money. Because your tech startup failed 6 months ago and you've been living on credit ever since. Because you wanted this wedding, you wanted this life, and you thought I wouldn't notice a line of credit until you could pay it back or flip another deal." I stepped closer to him. "But there is no other deal, is there?" Julian's eyes darted toward the door, then back to me. The charm was entirely gone now. His skin looked slightly slick under the room's warm lighting. "Look," he hissed, stepping closer and lowering his voice so it wouldn't carry past the heavy wooden door. "It's a loan, Arthur. A loan. I was going to put it back. I just needed a bridge. A temporary bridge to clear some liquidity issues before the wedding. You have millions. You wouldn't even have felt it for a few months." "It's not a loan when you take it without permission. It's theft." "We're brothers," he whispered fiercely, grabbing my sleeve. "You're going to ruin my life over a temporary cash flow issue. Just tell the bank it was an oversight. Tell them you authorized it. Please, Kelly is out there. Mom is out there. If you say anything now." "I already spoke to the bank, Julian." He stopped breathing. His hand dropped from my sleeve. "What did you do?" "I signed the forgery affidavit on Thursday," I said, looking him dead in the eye. "The bank didn't wait for the weekend to clear. They moved it to the state prosecutor's office yesterday morning." Julian's face went entirely white, a stark contrast against his black tuxedo. "You called the cops on your own brother, before my wedding." "You robbed your own brother," I countered. "You made your choice when you picked up that pen. I'm just letting the system handle the paperwork." Before he could answer, the door swung open. Our mother stood there, radiant in a champagne-colored gown, her face glowing with excitement. "Boys, it's time," she said, looking between us. She paused, noticing the suffocating tension in the room. "Is everything all right? You both look so serious." Julian looked at me, a desperate, begging plea in his eyes. He was waiting to see if I would blow the whistle right there, in front of our mother, 30 minutes before the ceremony. I looked at my mother, forced a small, polite smile, and adjusted my jacket. "Everything is fine, Mom," I said. "Julian was just realizing the gravity of the commitment he's making today." She beamed, stepping in to kiss Julian's pale cheek. "Oh, sweetheart, you're shaking. It's just nerves. Come on, the guests are seated." As she led him out, Julian looked back at me over his shoulder. The fear in his eyes was absolute, a cold realization that the ground beneath his feet was no longer solid. He thought he had survived the confrontation. He thought the danger was deferred until after the weekend. He had no idea that the bank didn't care about wedding schedules. The ceremony was a blur of hollow rituals. I stood exactly 3 feet to Julian's right, fulfilling my role as the best man. I handed him the platinum bands when the priest prompted me, my fingers briefly brushing against his. His skin was ice cold and damp. Every time Julian looked out at the sea of 200 faces, his eyes seemed to twitch, scanning the crowd not for friends, but for uniforms. He botched his vows twice, stumbling over the words asterisk to have and to hold, his voice cracking slightly. The guests laughed softly, assuming it was the sweet, vulnerable nerves of a man deeply in love. Only I knew the truth. He was suffocating under the weight of a countdown timer he couldn't see. Kelly looked stunning, entirely oblivious to the fact that her luxury lifestyle was a house of cards built on a foundation of federal bank fraud. When the priest finally pronounced them husband and wife, Julian kissed her with a desperate intensity, like a drowning man catching a final gasp of air. During the cocktail hour on the lawn, Julian tried to corner me behind the champagne tower. "Arthur, please," he muttered, his eyes darting wildly. "We can fix this. I have a buddy who is closing a real estate syndication next week. I can get the full 450 grand back into your account by Thursday. Just call Marcus Vance. Tell him it was a misunderstanding. Tell him we share an entity." "It's out of my hands, Julian," I said, taking a slow sip of water. "The bank is the victim of the fraud, not just me. They secured a federal charter. Once the automated risk flag triggers a criminal referral, it belongs to the state. You can't call off a prosecutor like a barking dog." "You did this to punish me," he hissed, his teeth clenched so hard I could hear them grind. "You always hated that I didn't want to spend my life sweating over shipping manifests and warehouse logistics like you did. You wanted to see me crawl." "I wanted a brother I could trust," I replied. "Instead, I got a thief who used my life's work as his personal line of credit." Before he could respond, Kelly pulled him away to take photos with her family. I watched him go, his laughter sounding increasingly forced, his movements jerky and unnatural. By 7 in the evening, the party shifted into the grand ballroom. The venue was breathtaking, vast ceilings, massive stone fireplaces, and tables draped in heavy velvet. The atmosphere was thick with the scent of expensive white roses and burning candles. I sat at the head table to the right of the newlyweds. My mother sat across from us, crying happy tears, completely captivated by the spectacle. "Arthur," she whispered, leaning across the table while Kelly and Julian were busy greeting a line of extended family. "Look at him. He's finally settling down. I know you two have had your differences with business, but it means the world to me that you're standing by him today." The guilt hit me then, sharp and sudden. My mother didn't deserve the fallout of what was coming. She had spent her entire life trying to keep our fractured family together after our father passed. But protecting Julian now would mean destroying myself. If I absorbed a $450,000 fraudulent hit, my logistics firm would miss its quarterly debt service ratio. The bank would call my legitimate loans. My employees would lose their jobs. My life would be liquidated to pay for Julian's illusions. I'm just glad he's experiencing the consequences of his choices, Mom, I said carefully. She smiled, missing the double meaning entirely. He's a man now, Arthur, thanks to your good example. At 7:30, the room fell silent for the speeches. As the best man, I was up first. I stood up, tapping my microphone, holding a glass of sparkling water. Julian's entire body went rigid in his chair. He stared at me, his knuckles white against the edge of the table, terrified of what I might say to the room. I kept it brief, professional, and utterly devoid of genuine warmth. I spoke of our childhood, our shared history, and wished them a future built on unwavering transparency and accountability. The guests clapped enthusiastically. Julian just stared down at his plate, his chest rising and falling in shallow, rapid breaths. He knew every word was a quiet promise of execution. Then came the first dance. The lights dimmed, and a soft, melancholic ballad filled the room. Julian and Kelly took the center of the floor. As they spun under the warm spotlights, Julian seemed to relax slightly, perhaps believing that the sheer opulence of the night would shield him from reality. He whispered something in Kelly's ear, and she laughed, burying her face in his neck. That was the exact moment the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom clicked open. In a room filled with 200 people dressed in tuxedos and evening gowns, the arrivals stood out like ink on a white sheet. There were 4 of them, 3 men and 1 woman. They weren't wearing formal attire. They wore dark corporate suits, crisp white shirts, and small, unobtrusive lapel pins representing the state's financial crimes task force. Leading them was a tall, silver-haired man I recognized immediately, Detective Vance, Marcus's cousin, and the lead investigator for the regional white-collar division. Behind them, standing in the shadows of the doorway, was a low-level bank representative holding a secured leather document case. The music was still playing, but a ripple of uneasy silence began to spread from the tables nearest the door. People turned their heads, murmuring. The presence of law enforcement at a high-society wedding gala is an immediate, infectious alarm. The investigators didn't shout. They didn't draw weapons. They didn't need to. They moved with the terrifying, absolute authority of the state. They walked down the center aisle of the ballroom, their hard leather shoes clicking softly against the polished floor, heading straight for the dance floor. Julian saw them first. He was in the middle of a slow turn, his hand resting on Kelly's waist. As his eyes locked onto Detective Vance, his entire body suffered a physical shock. It was as if the temperature in the room had dropped 40 degrees in a single second. He stopped dead in his tracks, mid-step. Kelly, thrown off balance, stumbled slightly and looked up at him, confused. "Julian, what's wrong?" she asked, her voice carrying over the microphone of the live band, which was starting to sputter to a halt as the musicians noticed the intrusion. Julian didn't answer her. He couldn't. His jaw was slightly slack, his eyes wide and fixed on the approaching figures. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a medical emergency. His skin went from a flushed, celebratory pink to a dull, translucent gray. The music cut out entirely. The silence that followed was suffocating, broken only by the crackle of a distant fireplace and the low, panicked whisper of my mother. "Arthur, who are those people? What is happening?" I didn't answer. I just watched my brother freeze. Detective Vance stopped exactly 3 feet from the edge of the dance floor. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a gold badge, holding it up just high enough for Julian to see, but low enough to maintain a shred of professional discretion. "Julian Vance Harris?" the detective asked, his voice calm, clear, and perfectly audible in the dead silence of the room. Julian tried to speak. His throat clicked, but no sound came out. He swallowed hard, his hands dropping from his new wife's waist like lead weights. He gave a single, microscopic nod. "I am Detective Vance with the State Financial Crimes Unit," the investigator said, stepping onto the dance floor. "I have a warrant for your arrest issued by the Commercial Banking Fraud Division." The charges are grand larceny, identity theft, and the forgery of a commercial loan document totaling $450,000. A collective, gasping intake of breath echoed through the ballroom. Someone dropped a water glass at a rear table. The shatter sounded like a gunshot. Kelly looked at the detective, then at Julian, her face contorting into a mask of pure horror. What? No, this is a mistake. Today is our wedding. Julian, tell them this is a mistake. Julian didn't look at her. He couldn't look at anyone. His gaze slowly shifted across the room, past the staring faces of his friends, past his trembling mother, until his eyes locked onto mine. I stood at the head table, my hands folded neatly in front of me, my expression entirely unreadable. I reached into my jacket, pulled out the matte black pen, and placed it flat on the white tablecloth between us. The silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds as the realization settled into his bones. The bank hadn't waited for Monday. The trap hadn't just been set. It had already snapped shut, and he was standing in the middle of the wreckage. The silence in the ballroom didn't break. It deepened, turning into a heavy, suffocating weight that pressed down on every guest in attendance. Julian looked down at the matte black pen resting on the white tablecloth in front of me. The symbol was clear. He knew exactly who had handed the state its ammunition. His lips moved, but the words were caught in his throat, dry and hollow. He looked like an actor who had completely forgotten his lines on opening night, stripped of his easy charm, exposed under the harsh, unyielding light of reality. "Arthur," my mother whispered, her fingers digging into my forearm with a desperate, bruising strength. "Do something. Call Marcus. Tell them this is a joke. They can't do this to your brother. Not today, not in front of everyone." "I can't stop this, Mom," I said, keeping my voice soft, almost clinical. "Nobody can." Kelly stepped between Julian and the investigators, her white silk train rustling loudly in the quiet room. Her bridal bouquet fell from her hand, the white roses scattering across the polished floor. "You have the wrong person. My husband is a venture capitalist. He doesn't steal. Julian, show them your ID. Tell them who you are." Detective Vance didn't argue. He didn't raise his voice. He simply signaled to the female investigator standing slightly behind him. She stepped forward, unfolding a glossy sheet of paper. It was a high-resolution printout of the bank's internal security log, detailing the exact IP address mapping, the fraudulent burner phone location, and a crystal-clear security image of Julian entering my private office on the afternoon of the forgery, captured by the discreet security camera he didn't know I had installed after my last Tokyo trip. "The documentation has been verified by the Commercial Risk Division, ma'am," Detective Vance said to Kelly, his tone completely professional yet entirely devoid of warmth. "The warrant is fully executed. Sir, please place your hands behind your back." Julian didn't fight. The fluid, arrogant confidence that had defined his entire life had evaporated. He turned around slowly, his movements stiff and mechanical, like a wooden puppet. The female investigator stepped up, her uniform jacket shifting to reveal the heavy silver handcuffs. The sharp, metallic asterisk, click, 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 asterisk of the restraints locking around his wrists sounded incredibly loud in the cavernous ballroom. A collective murmur broke out among the tables. Kelly dropped to her knees, her hands covering her face as she began to sob uncontrollably, the expensive lace of her dress soaking up the spilled water from the broken glass near the dance floor. Her father, a proud corporate attorney who had spent the last 6 months boasting about his new son-in-law's financial acumen, stood up from his seat, his face a deep, furious crimson. He didn't step forward to defend Julian. He looked at him with pure, icy disgust. "Arthur," my mother sobbed, standing up, her chair screeching against the floor. "Please, he's your brother." "He's a criminal, Mom," I said, finally looking her in the eyes. "He used my name, my credit, and the equity that keeps my company alive to fund a fantasy. If I don't let them take him, the bank takes the warehouse. The business goes under. Everything I've built for the last 15 years vanishes by Monday morning. Is that what you want?" She stared at me, her mouth open. the words dying in her throat as the brutal math of the situation finally registered. She looked at Julian, then back at me, realizing that the golden boy she had spent a lifetime coddling had tried to quietly bury his own blood to pay for a luxury lifestyle. The investigators began to lead Julian away. They walked him back down the center aisle, past the rows of horrified wedding guests who, just minutes ago, had been raising toasts to his bright future. He kept his head down, staring at the floor, his shoulders hunched as if trying to shrink away from the hundreds of eyes tracking his exit. As they reached the heavy double doors at the back of the ballroom, Julian paused for a fraction of a second. He turned his head slightly, looking back across the expanse of the room one last time. I didn't blink. I picked up the matte black pen from the table, slid it into my breast pocket, and picked up my glass of water. I met his gaze with total finality. There was no anger left in me, no desire for vengeance. There was only the quiet, immutable reality of a balanced ledger. Julian's head dropped again, and the doors clicked shut behind him, cutting off the crisp night air and leaving the room in a shattered, irreversible silence.